Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you, Andrea and Maria, for your invitation to share my research at Music and Embodiment Seminar Series. For my talk today, I have prepared a slideshow, and here's the MP4 recording of it. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start with some context for my presentation today. My primary research area is the history of music theory, especially the late 19th and early 20th century intersection between mind science and music theory. But for the last 10 years or so, I have been interested in the broader subject of music and the body. I organized a conference in 2012 and worked as a co-editor of the Oxford Handbook on the subject. And during this process, I had the opportunity to collaborate with and be inspired by a wide range of researchers and practitioners. I became particularly interested in the music psychology of piano playing body in historical discourse, which I researched and published an article about. I also conducted a small-scale empirical study with contemporary pianists to investigate the modal resonance amongst them. Today's paper is being developed out of this process, more specifically focusing on the issue of piano fingering. Bodies are back in, wrote Arthur W. Frank in his 1990 article reviewing the field of social sciences. In the musicological discourse too, the body has been brought back in, only recently though, despite the obvious connection between music and the body. The screen shows the frequency of the phrase music and the body in the 19th and 20th centuries obtained by Google and Graham. Since the late 20th century performative turn, the performer's body in particular has been investigated in various fields, including physiology, biomechanics, music psychology, and music theory. Still, there are underexplored aspects of the relationship between music and the body, and in this talk, I'd like to explore ways to bring the performance bodies into the discourse of music analysis. The objective of the study can be presented as follows. First, I'd like to pursue highlighting a reciprocal relationship between analysis and performance in contrast to the previously assumed prescriptive, linear, unidirectional, and often authoritarian link from analysis to performance. Second, I would also like to bring out musicology as a data-rich field, as David Youn pointed out in 1993, by dealing with the historical scores, both audio and video recordings, and graphic visualizations of recordings. In so doing, I'd like to test out a possibility of connecting and bringing different perspectives together across different fields of music history, theory, empirical musicology, and analysis. The talk will be comprised of 3 parts. In part 1, I'd like to discuss 3 theoretical and methodological propositions. In part 2, I will present a case study focusing on a passage selected from Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 111 and demonstrate how analytical issues emerged through the process of examining various kinds of data. And then a short reflection will follow as a conclusion. The first theoretical and methodological proposition I'd like to attempt in this paper is to consider plural scores as well as diverse performances. Music performance analysis, or the approach of music as performance, is no longer marginal in the field of musicology. The focus has been shifted from page to stage. Nonetheless, many empirical studies of music performance, especially earlier studies, tend to focus on comparing different recordings based upon the assumption that performers manipulate performance parameters differently in order to project or bring out its underlying structure. And this underlying structure is often assumed to be represented in a single authoritative text score. Instead of assuming such a single authoritative score, the present study proposes to consider both plural score additions and diverse performances. As a way to highlight the performance law as an important actor of musical communication, this study will consider the various performing editions, which were prepared and edited by pianists and pedagogues of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Many of these editions are now available in the public domain via digital collections, but a thorough examination of these scores remains an underexplored field. Such score editions prepared by pianists/interpreters/pedagogues began to flourish after around 1860. One representative example is the critical and instructive edition with explanatory remarks for teachers and pupils, edited by a conductor and virtuoso pianist Hans von Bülow. The title page is shown on the screen. We can see the size of the font used for the editor's name is as prominent as that for the composer. Now, this screen shows a comparison between a page of Beethoven's Opus 111, which will be discussed later, from the Henle text edition on the left side and Bülow's performing edition on the right side, which presents the page substantially differently. Fingering indications for nearly all passages, expression marks, phrasing signs, as well as verbal comments are added. Many of the editions are unauthorized. Hence, these editions are considered to mislead and corrupt the original text. In the previous model of musical communication, these performance instructions, such as fingering indications and the verbal comments in the margin of the scores, were considered mere glosses at best, and interventions, distortions, and even corrupt at worst. They were mere noise, interfering with the musical communication from composer to performer, hence not considered as the object of music analysis. On the other hand, the present study will adopt a contextualized model of musical communication, in which these additions constitute an important parameter of musical analysis, highlighting performance body as the active agency of distributing music cognition. The second theoretical methodological proposition concerns taking fingering indications, especially those for Beethoven's piano works, into consideration in music analysis. Piano fingering is the choice of which fingers to use in playing certain passages. Several different criteria can be considered in deciding fingering. Some fingering rules advocate the most comfortable, the least movement, minimal physical effort, and easiest means, while others lean toward reflecting musical structure. Beethoven's fingering, however, often presents problems rather than a simple set of instructions. Often, his fingering indications contain suggestions for audacious fingering that contradicts the standard fingering and require greater bodily effort. This makes sense if we consider the performing context of Beethoven's piano sonatas in his own time. Unlike today, his piano sonatas were not performed in public concerts, but rather understood as domestic music in Beethoven's period. To quote, the main context for performances of the sonatas, however, was the numerous semi-private matinees and soirees run by the nobility, private domestic performances for individuals or by individuals. What did the composer expect when these virtuosic and complex pieces were performed by amateur pianists? Such a performance context at home engenders a special relationship. Pianist Jonathan Biss describes it as a kind of private experimentation between Beethoven and the player. From this vantage point, fingering indications in the performing editions constitute the result of performances by the pianist as both writing musician and performing musician. The third proposition involves a serious consideration of scalar passages. A page from Carl Czerny's practical finger exercises is displayed on the screen. When it comes to scales, many piano students may think about such fingering exercises. What about scalar passages included in a musical work, on the other hand? Simple ascending and descending scalar passages tended not to receive much attention in the conventional music analysis, and even in the performance analysis, such as the studies on expressive timing. The emphasis has been placed on the passages with clear phrase structure rather than transitional passages. However, the study of such scalar passages and how to perform them can provide a valuable resource for music analysis and embodied music cognition. On the one hand, it elicits the standardized scale fingering that the pianist has learned and stored as a kind of muscle memory. It also provides an opportunity for the pianist to show off their skills. On the other hand, the various contexts surrounding the passage may suggest different ways of playing the passage. To quote Heinrich Schenker's words, passages and scales are unfortunately frequently misunderstood purely as finger exercises, devoid of spirit. However, playing it superficially as an empty, fast finger demonstration, bare of any expression, is pointless. Precisely the context of the passage should demonstrate to us that it serves as a means of expression as well. Unquote. Schenker continued that scalar passages in Beethoven's works in particular should be given the dignity of the most genuine and beautiful expression. So the question is, what is being expressed in the performances of the scalar passages? I'd like to discuss this question by taking the case in point from Beethoven's Piano Sonata Op. 111, the end of the second movement, Arietta. The movement is well known not only for its sheer length and technical difficulty, but also for the extensive scope of register in dynamics. Let's hear the passage. This is Maurizio Pollini's live performance recording. In Donald Toby's companion to Beethoven's pianoforte sonatas, these scalar passages are merely described as 2 bars of dominant 2-part run and a run in 6 from tonic. The work is also famously referred to in Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus. While the characteristic long chain of trills preceding this passage received substantial discussion, the following scalar passage is simply described as follows. Then it breaks off. Quick, hard triplets hastened to a conclusion with which any other piece might have ended. However, looking into how this passage appeared in the various performing editions raises more interesting issues beyond the simple run in 6. I have examined 11 different scores, including Beethoven's original manuscript, earlier editions published during the composer's lifetime, and the performing editions published in the early 20th century. I also analyzed the performance of the passages performed by various pianists, and the information of the 12 recordings examined are shown on the screen. It is hard to tell from recordings precisely which fingering was used and to determine which scores these pianists used. And maybe that is not the most pressing issue here, I think. More important is considering multiple interpretations as represented in various score editions and recordings, and what such a consideration can inspire. While examining these varied interpretations, several interesting issues emerged from this process. I have collated the editions and recordings together, which, at least to my ear, represent similar sorts of interpretations and pose related interpretive issues. The first issue concerns the fingering indication. In Beethoven's original manuscript, the composer himself indicated 1, 2, 3 for the left hand only. The earlier editions published by Schlesinger during Beethoven's lifetime, and the editions published shortly after Beethoven's death, such as Haslinger, kept the dynamic marks but do not contain the fingering 1 to 3 for the left hand. The passage appears very differently in Hans von Billow's performing edition. The triplet grouping is clearly indicated by separate beaming in the ascending melody, but for the descending scalar passage, the notes are beamed into 6 plus 3. Beethoven's original fingering 1 to 3 for the left hand are kept, but instead of interpreting as a continuation of the triplet grouping in the previous measure, it is construed as a part of the standard fingering for scale playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fingering of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1 is given for the right hand. Performing editions continued to be published in the 1910s and 1920s. The attitude to improve the text was now disregarded, and more reference to the original text were given. The 1918 edition, done by the pianist Frederick Lamont, for example, attempted to present both the practical edition and the original or text. Like Billow's edition, Lamont's edition indicates the 5-4-3-2-1, 4-3-2-1, and 1-2-3-4 and 1-2-3-4-5, the standard scale fingering, as the main fingering, but also added 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3 for the left hand as an alternative. On the other hand, music theorist Heinrich Schenker's edition, which was claimed to be reconstructed according to the autograph, as well as the German pianist and pedagogue Max Pauer's 1920 edition, construed Beethoven's 1-2-3 fingering for the left hand, implying the continuation of the triplet grouping in the previous measures for this passage as well. So, what is the meaning of these various fingering indications? At first, the different two fingering indications point to the different grouping structure, either as the triplet grouping structure suggested by 3-2-1, 3-2-1, 3-2-1 for the right hand, or the descending scale as a whole spanning an octave suggested by a standard scale fingering. However, the meaning of the fingering goes beyond simple indication of the grouping structure. It invites the performer to become conscious of his or her performing body and express it differently. Hence, two different fingering indications seemingly pointing to the structure issue of different grouping suggest two distinct ways of shaping the passage. First, as a precisely even, machine-like mechanical descending motion 3-2-1, 3-2-1, continuing the triplet motion from the previous passages. Or as a sweeping, flowing, and spontaneous gesture, adopting standard scale fingering, which corresponds to the procedural knowledge stored as implicit sensory motor schemes in the pianist's body. If you remember, the first video recording presented, the performance by Bodily shows the first kind of fingering, whereas this audio recording by Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli's live performance in 1990 expresses a different, more sweeping, flowing, and more spontaneous motion. From the standpoint of embodied music cognition, there is an even more intriguing issue with playing this simple scalar line. Beethoven, a pianist himself, marked the descending scale with a crescendo and the arrival point C4 with a forte. It's worth noting the pairing of descending motion, falling pitch, and crescendo here. Theoretically, of course, any combination between rising falling and crescendo decrescendo is possible, but we can say that rising crescendo, falling decrescendo are more frequently encountered and more consistently paired than rising decrescendo and falling crescendo. For example, some 19th century vocal treatises specify that rising portamento should have a crescendo and descending portamento should have diminuendo. Also, recent studies on cross-modal mapping of pitch and loudness illuminate the interesting dynamic between different musical parameters in this passage. For example, falling pitch is more consistently paired with moving downward, decreasing energy, shrinking, and decreasing dynamic, in other words, decrescendo, rather than crescendo. The pairing of falling pitch and crescendo at the end of Beethoven's Opus 111, therefore, presents an inconsistent or at least uncommon conceptual pairing, contrary to the normative tendency of embodied cognition. The melodic range spectrogram and the peak frequency spectrogram obtained by Sony Visualizer of Claudio Orao's performance are displayed on the screen. The y-axis is the frequency, hence these two spectrograms show the frequency content of the passage. Let's hear the passage again. As noted previously, the movement spans an extensive scope of registers and is frequently described in terms of vertical imagery. For example, Thomas Mann once wrote about the motive in the movement, hovering alone above a yawning giddy abyss, a procedure of awe-inspiring unearthliness. Similar imageries are found in the descriptions of the music by Wilhelm von Rendt and Hans von Bülow, such as Heavenly Peace and Nirvana. These graphs show the ascending to this unearthly dimension and the descending down to the abyss, and it is combined with increasing dynamic, as can be seen from the overlaid waveform, getting heavier, so to speak. The passage can also be characterized from a bodily perspective, especially from the performance point of view. The sentiments of Paul Becker and Louis Lagoud are relevant here, speaking of the yearning of a great man which stretched from earth to heaven. And this spirit of the mortal, vulnerable human being, striving against the odds to hold his moral being steady in order to gather strength as an artist to strive toward the heavens. In both, the efforts and labors are highlighted. One reviewer in the Harmonicon in 1823 also wrote, quote, "All this really is laboriously trifling," unquote. Certain performing editions clearly bring out such performing bodies or performing bodies effort. For example, the beaming in Alfredo Casella's critical edition dictates the triplet grouping, both for the ascending and descending motions. However, the added phrasing marks and the standard scale fingering of 5-4-3-2-1, 4-3-2-1 for the right hand, and 1-2-3-4, 1-2-3-4-5 for the left hand, for the descending passage suggests a different interpretation, which may make playing this passage more challenging. According to this rendition, the ascending motion is to be played without rushing and lightweight, almost unbound, but the descending motion is to be played with more effort and labor, so much so that the passage ends with slight ritardando on the arrival point of C. Some performances express such bodily effort and exertion from the performance side, and they can be read in the duration graphs. The screen shows the spectrogram and the duration graph of the passage played by Schnabel, produced by Sony Visualizer. The green, yellow, red color spectrogram displays the frequency content, with the vertical axis being the frequency. The duration graph, the curve in orange color, is produced by the duration since the previous item function and overlaid on the top of the spectrogram. And in this layer, the higher on the y-axis means longer duration. In other words, the rising curve means slowing down, and the falling curve means speeding up. This brings up an intuitive sense that climbing up takes slowing down, and down the hill takes the speeding up. We can thus construe rising graph suggest taking more effort or labor, and the other way around. In this performance, all durations constituting the descending scale are rather even up to the last couple of notes until the passage arrives at C4. The performance by Pogorelic is slower, but the duration graph looks similar, meaning all durations constituting the descending scale again are rather even up to the last couple of notes. Sviatoslav Richter's graph is similar, although the overall tempo is much faster. These performances suggest rather mechanized body. Certain performers express different kinds of performing bodies, probably closer to the stretching, yawning, and striving bodies we talked about before. For instance, Walter Gieseking's graph is not so much even, characterized by shorter ascending lines towards the end of the passage, as if the performer is getting exhausted. Such gradual slowing down toward the end, getting exhausted, also featured in Mitsuko Uchida's graph. Her performance also features a rubato at the beginning of the descending scale, as if the body hesitates before lowering down. Glenn Gould's performance has the most erratic and shifting graph. It implies a different kind of body than the mechanized body represented by Richter's performance, for example. Our investigation began with the various fingerings suggested in the score and moved to the examination of their implications in the recordings and visualized graphs. Fingering is much more than just instruction for easier playing. Different fingerings express distinct performing bodies such as mechanized, striving, hesitating, and flowing bodies. These performing bodies expressed in the scores and performances, which may be referred to as forms of vitality in Daniel Stan's word, are an essential component linking performance and analysis. The relationship between the two is much more complicated than the taken-for-granted premise that performers can benefit from analysis of the work they perform. Performances are not merely the outcome of analysis, but can be the source of analysis. Intriguing analytical issues can emerge in the process of examining various performances. I'd like to wrap up the conclusion with a quick reflection on the concept of virtuosity. I found this rather amusing clip posted on YouTube, which is a really fast performance of Chinese 30 new studies in techniques, apparently produced by a computer. No one would describe this performance virtuosic, and this raises the subject of the paradox of virtuosity. In short, manifesting effort is a condition for many artworks, but one of the reasons why certain performances are outstanding is that effort is not manifest. Here comes the paradox of virtuosity. It transcends the boundary yet remains within the realm of the natural. Beethoven's Opus 111 demands numerous technical and interpretive challenges from the performer. In the seemingly simple descending scalar passage at the end of the final movement of Beethoven's last piano sonata, different pianists express different virtuosic performing bodies. Sometimes the body transcends the anatomical challenges of crossover and cross-under fingering. Other times, the natural body can hesitate, try hard, and get exhausted after playing the long, technically demanding piece. Performers, from this viewpoint, are not passive transmitters of musical communication, but an important agency for generating musical meaning. Thank you.